out of winter with some serious windstorms that were caused by the Puget Sound energy outage for several days. And one of the things that happened then was there were many of the families from other ethnic communities, specifically some of the Vietnamese communities, where they brought their grill indoors as a source of cooking and heat. And this resulted in carbon monoxide poisoning, and there were quite a few incidents throughout our region where some families lost their lives, and we even had one in Renton. And it was a real big wake-up call for the entire community, and certainly specifically for us in Renton, saying as we are looking at working with our community members, our programs, first of all, it's very, very important that we have ways to encourage our community members to help themselves in terms of emergencies. And then we find a way to bring this information out to all our communities. So that really was the birth of what you're going to be seeing in the next 10 minutes or so about our whole program, how that developed and how it evolved. That, like I said, kind of set the stage, saying we want to be a city, we're going to be committed to be an inclusive city, we want to provide opportunities for all, we want to build connections with all our communities, and we did want to have a special emphasis on some of the communities that we've had a harder time reaching out to with our traditional methods, such as some of the non-English speaking communities, our vulnerable populations, and pretty much all our residents. And now kind of fast forward to last year, where as a council, you actually took this effort of ours that we've been working on as a city for a few years and put that stamp of this is a priority. Further established it by including it as part of Renton's business plan. And our mission statement states clearly that we are building an all-inclusive city with opportunities for all. And that's part of our mission and our goals. So some of the specific goals there are to build the connections and partnerships with our communities, make our city's programs and services more accessible, excuse me, help our communities be healthier and better prepared for emergencies, and we call that out as a specific emphasis. We also want to hear from and engage all our members of our community in the civic process, be part of government, be part of the decision making. And then of course, understanding, if we understand and respect our diversity, we actually bridge any gaps that are there and get closer, and celebrations and festivals are a great way of doing that. So to give you a brief update on what we've done, some of these things in the past year, some of them we've been developing over the years. One of the things, and a very creative approach that we undertook, was to create this network of community liaisons representing different groups. Each of the community liaisons would either be designated as leaders in their own community groups, or just folks who were interested, who carried influence, and would be that connection. And I can't tell you the number of situations and stories and efforts where we've really worked well with them bringing to us their needs and us being able to address this. As recently as yesterday, there was an East Side Latino Forum, East Side Latino Leadership Forum at Bellevue City Hall. And our community liaison went for that and sent me an email. I mean, I knew about it and invited him to that. It was clashing with our retreat here, and he said, I'll give you an update, and thank you for the invitation. So it's an ongoing conversation that we've had. And the examples are endless, from us sending an information on window safety, and one of our community liaisons from the Somali community calling back and saying, thank you for giving this to me. I shared this with my neighbor, and she got her child as they were playing with the window. So the stories are endless. Another really wonderful thing we did last year, thanks to Terry Higashiyama and Community Services, is we facilitated a workshop, actually 2 workshops, and a visit to the exhibit put on at the Pacific Science Center on race. And this was fascinating. This was open to all employees, and nearly a third of our employees attended. And there was first a session moderated by 2 facilitators who opened up initially the conversation about what do we know about race, what do we think, open conversations. Then we went and attended the exhibit, and then came back and continued. And it was just a fascinating, really well put together exhibit with various elements there, and allowed you at your own pace and time to absorb, have your interpretations, and then come back. It was just one of the most, wonderfully educational moments that was open to all city employees. As I mentioned before, emergency preparedness has been one of the key criteria in terms of our outreach programs. And we've done a lot of things every year on this front. Last year, one of the things we did was, as part of Ready in Renton, we actually had an emergency preparedness kit distribution event, where we invited members of our community liaisons, and had a workshop where we showed them what was in emergency preparedness kits, how to put those together, and then gave them the kits. But most importantly, this was step 1 rather than step, the 10th step, where they signed up to be in a speakers bureau so that they could then go to their community members and either have events where they would show them how they could prepare kits. And in some cases, we even said, if you get a large group of people together, we'll work with you to get some funding for kits. And it's an ongoing process that Fire and Emergency Services is actually coordinating. And we've been doing this kind of on an ongoing basis. We translated these DVDs a few years ago. They're available on our city YouTube page. But again, every couple months I'll get a request saying, can you please make some copies of the Spanish DVD for me? We have a community event and we'll distribute those. And I was just telling Chief and Mark, saying we couldn't have timed this better. The Renton Heart Month program has taken on emphasis to provide the free blood pressure, blood sugar screenings, again, to all members of our communities. And just today, they were right here at Merrill Gardens, checking of the seniors and the residents here. And this is something that they've taken. This is really one of our signature programs because it's looking at the health of our community. And here again, in the last few years, there have been steps made to go that extra mile, to focus on and target our diverse communities, work with our community liaisons, go to the Sikh temple, go to the St. Anthony's Church. This year, they added an emphasis to go to schools and to work with school kids, go to senior populations, go to the senior center. So, another way that a program that otherwise, was still being available to all is now being available to all and targeting our vulnerable populations. You've all been part of the, grand opening and, the Center for Hope that's now in our previous jail. And we just got this report from them. I mean, and there are wonderful stories that they have to tell, in addition to these numbers of the people, who've come there, who've been able to use the shelter, who've got donations, who've really been able to rebuild their lives and even find housing. And this is just a sense of some of the things that they've done. And this is, again, back to the inclusive city, addressing the needs of all, looking at homelessness and actually taking some action so that we can, make a difference to end homelessness and to address the issue in our city. Chip mentioned the community needs assessment, and this is a report that you should have later this year. It's been work that's been done, and it does have that key emphasis of looking at what are the top human services needs that we have. And then, as you do know, as part of the human service program, we have funds that we allocate and have a system that divides these to the populations and the nonprofit groups that really need them. We're also working on a human service strategic plan and a senior plan to come up with the needs and strategies and ways to address these needs. And talking about some of the other things we do, Senior Center, approximately 250 adults every day use the programs and recreational opportunities and nutritional services and go there for Heart Month. Our special recreation program, again, by the Community Services Group, great range of sports, great arts program, and we have a social program, which is one of the most popular, with 70 participants each week. We have scholarships that we offer for our recreation programs, and again, we have approximately 300 people every year who get these assistance. And then every summer, we work with the Renton School District to provide summer lunch, and we have students from various groups, the non-English speaking communities, various ethnic groups from our city. And then every month, the museum has some program that showcases Renton's diversity, from Black History Month program to the Salish to our English classroom. Last year, they did just this wonderful partnership with the Renton High School on our diversity, and got the students engaged in the exhibit. They're doing it again. And they're going to do it again this year. And then every year, the RTC has an event, a fair. They've called it Community and International Festival, and we participate closely with them. And in fact, the museum has a strong partnership for that program as well. Excuse me. We mentioned earlier that part of our goals was also to engage our community, to have people representing different viewpoints participate. I've just thrown one example here, with our budget task force and the SIF host committee and the parks task force. But recently, the Benson Hill Community Plan was actually acknowledged and showcased with the AWC and MSRC, saying this was one of the best examples of community planning where the city actually went, took the extra steps to include members of the diverse community groups to participate in this critical planning for the city. And this is something that we're doing on an ongoing basis, saying we have our boards and commissions and task forces. Let's find a way to encourage people bringing those diverse viewpoints as we plan together for the city's future. Now, one of the things that we talked about was partnerships, relationships, and part of that is information and communication. I do want all of you to know that as I send out press releases and you receive my press releases, as I send it to the media, I also maintain a list of ethnic media contacts. And so, especially depending on the topic, on the need, I target our various ethnic media groups so that they have access to that information. Some of them will do their own translations. Some of them are in English, but they reach out to different community groups. So that's something we do. Here are some examples from, I think, about a couple years ago, where the Chinese newspaper as well as the Asian Weekly actually profiled Renton. And we also had, the KUNS TV station do a whole segment on Renton. And again, the nice thing there was they were focusing on emergency preparedness, and our community liaison was our spokesperson. So that was nice. There's a whole lot of different celebrations that different groups put together in our city. And the nice thing is, in the last few years, they will always invite us. and will be part, and oftentimes the mayor or some of the council members have gone, we'll say a few words, and it's just bringing that connection. This is a photo from the Cinco de Mayo celebration that's coming soon. And for me, one of the nicest things about this event at St. Anthony's was from the connections we had created with the Filipino community of Renton and the Latino community, they actually got together and participated together in this event. So I go there and I'm like, oh, hello, and, oh, you're also here. So it was really nice that, part of, we're reaching out, but they're also making connections with each other, which is great. The other thing we did and have been doing and have done about 3 or 4 a year is we've been having some community forums where we bring an important topic, invite members of our community liaisons, but also the general public, and have either discussions or provide information, and then kind of break up into small sessions of discussions on a range of topics. So, for example, last year we had a whole event dedicated to crime prevention. The chief was there, and for many of the community groups to have, the police chief sit at the table, talk to them, was just a way of breaking barriers, making connections. Cindy Parks was there, and she gave folks tips on how they can prevent burglaries, offered her services saying, if you get a group together, I'll come to your home and help you, prevent crime. We had another whole section on public sector careers. Nancy and her group organized this, and it was wonderful because it was sharing what are the opportunities for the public sector. There were folks there from the Renton, from the KCLS to help with resume writing. There were folks from the school district saying, here are jobs we have available right now. And then, of course, all our temporary jobs. And just opening the doors for the community to say, as you're looking for future career opportunities, here are some resources that are available. And then, of course, the others we've done a couple on emergency preparedness, and then we've had a couple where it's just been open conversations, and we hope to have another forum shortly. Like I said, this captures some of the things we've been doing. This is to bring you up to speed, kind of report back on, we made some of these commitments as part of our business plan last year, but I've been working on this. What we hope to do is to come back to you at a more in-depth session for Committee of the Whole and talk about next steps, come with some proposals on how we will really expand this program. And one last thing I want to share is, among other things, I've been doing a lot of research looking at what the other cities, what Seattle County has been doing. I've shared with them the stuff we've been doing, and it's really we're going in the right direction. Every city department has integrated working with all our communities, making opportunities available, which is really fantastic, rather than, here's a program out here. But we realize this is, scratching the surface. There's a lot more we can do. There's a lot more of these opportunities that we can take advantage of, and that's what our plan is.
Okay, so I appreciate everything that we've done. This is important. These are important things, especially when it relates to emergency preparedness and making sure that we're connected with our communities in that regard. But what I didn't hear about was anything that talked about policies, actual action step policies. And I appreciated that we have people within our different departments who are trying to embed some of their efforts through this lens. But there still is the absence of policy. And the kind of policy that I'm speaking of is the same kind of policy that I brought before this retreat for the past 3 years. Things that reach out like what Seattle is doing with their Race and Social Justice Initiative, King County and their Equity and Social Justice Ordinance, where they have adopted policy that drives the actions that they take to create not only inclusivity, but equity, which is different. And equity seeks to identify groups that have been treated with desperate types of outcomes. And we have those. We have similar populations that the county has. We have similar populations that the city has. In fact, our populations are more dense in those demographics. And so I would think that we would have a greater sensitivity to that. And some of the things that I'm thinking about is, I brought this to our council last year, how we hire. We're 51% people of color, but we've managed to hire 11% people of color, with our police department being the most diverse of all of the departments. 2/3 of the people of color who work for the city of Lincoln are in our police department. Our fire department has 1 African American out of 142 firefighters. And one of the things that I think that we ought to be sensitive about is, how that doesn't work for us as it looks at our receiving federal funding and our fire department. And that's, when we receive federal funding, there are some mandates that come along with that in terms of what we do with those dollars. And so I'm hoping that what we can do when we have this next meeting, and I would love to provide some input if asked, that we would talk about the type of initiatives that we can come up with here in our city and I think the very first step would be for us to just recognize that it does exist, that we do have not just, inclusivity is great. We need to be fair with all of our residents, but we have to identify that there are some populations that really have outcomes that are much different than others. And that looks at employment, it looks at how many people we find in our criminal justice system, in our courts, in our jails. It looks at, how do we hire and how do we contract with minority business enterprises as we award contracts. And it certainly looks out at how do we create the type of authentic civic engagement that brings diverse voices to the various different committees and things that we do. So I'm very concerned about that. So the very first thing we've got to do as a city, I believe, is to acknowledge that there is that existence of population of people of color, that have those outcomes. And when we can see it that way, then we'll look at our response a little bit differently. I wouldn't expect to go into an emergency room with a headache and get the same kind of acceptance as someone with a gunshot wound. You have to triage those things differently. And I don't get the sense that we're thinking in those terms right now. In our school system, we've got disproportionality in terms of kids being caught up in the criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system. The state recognizes that. The county recognizes that. Our school district is beginning to recognize that. So we have to recognize the things that are happening in our city to our populations, and we have to say it. And when we do that, then the next step for us would be to start talking about policies that can do something about it, that can change the employment disparity, that can change the lack of minority business enterprises that are engaged in contracts with the city of Renton, and also how do we civically engage and invite these groups into having access to what we do as a city. So I'm hoping that those are going to be some of the things that we're going to engage in during this, and I think 2 hours is a good start. I would encourage our council president to think in terms of providing an opportunity for our council to get some training. I appreciate the city making the offer of sending people from our city to the race conference. And just out of curiosity, how many people at this table went to the race conference? That's fantastic.
Oh, we didn't know you went. That's good.
Oh, I did go. Yes. I spent the whole day there. I went on my own. But that is something that should at least create some awareness of the type of institutional, structural racism that has taken place throughout our country and does exist even today. And so if we could maybe get some training, that would be great, because I think that...
So Greg, I think sorry, but just for that exhibit, I pretty may have said, just to reiterate, we made that a training. We had a 2-hour pre-training session with about 100 employees, and then we went to the exhibit, spent the afternoon, then we had another session afterwards. So we made it a significant.
And I'm aware of that. I had some, I want to come back in and give you some insight about that. But I'm speaking about our electeds. We're policymakers. And since I've been on this council, we haven't had any cultural competency training. And I would recommend that we start talking about that and look at doing that to raise our level of awareness.
And I just wanted to share a couple of things with the council. And one of the things that I discovered as I shared our program with many of the other cities is the fact that the council has adopted this as part of the business plan is really one of the strongest commitments. None of the other cities have done that. They've had ordinances or initiatives, but for this to be within the fabric of the business of the city, more than one city has come to me and said, that is really fascinating that the city council has done that in Renton. So, obviously these are policies that one can expand on. There are specific areas that, we can work towards as we have our future meetings to address instances. But I think one of our core strengths is that this is part of our business plan. And we made that, and then we're following up on it. So I think that commitment is there. The other thing I did want to share is, yes, there are issues of equity, there are vulnerable populations, but they range. And some of the things that, especially we've been doing with the Human Services Program is actually to address those. To look at people who have homelessness issues, look at people who might have, low income challenges, and how can we find ways that we either fund nonprofit groups that can help them. So look at senior populations that have other needs that, again, we want to make sure that we are aware of. So these are beginnings. There's always a continuous, effort for us to work at. But I think we have a good start, and I feel really blessed to be in this position where the commitment is there from the very top to really reach out and work with our community.
Preeti, I just have to, I have to address that. I have to say that in no way does the words that we have in our business plan, it's not a fair equivalency to equate that with the policy that the county has throughout their, in their ordinance. It spells out what they do and how they're going to do it specifically. The city of Seattle, the same thing in their Race and Social Justice Initiative. I appreciate what we've done. I've been very active as a council member over the years in trying to craft verbiage and language that would point towards action steps and goals that would produce, an initiative. Ultimately, that's what we want. We want something, a law, a policy that will be in place that will require whoever is in a position of the administrator or a policymaker here to follow, moving forward. And we don't have that right now. What we have is somewhat subjective. It can be interpreted in many ways. And to date, it has been interpreted in a way that has not produced a hiring policy that creates equity. It has not produced a contracting policy like the city of Seattle is doing right now and incentivizing prime contractors to utilize minority business contractors who've been locked out of getting gainful employment for a long time. Okay, and it has not produced an initiative that speaks towards creating the kind of civic engagement outreach opportunities that are meaningful and authentic to the degree that it does make a difference in terms of what we see in terms of people involved and engaged in the city. So I appreciate what we're doing. And I see some of the outcomes, and I want people that are doing that work to take credit for it and get credit for it. But I don't want us to make a false comparison here, because it isn't the same thing. And that's why we make policy, as opposed to having the subjectivity of doing it, when we feel like it, how we feel like it, with limitations on really creating empowerment. And at the end of the day, that's what equity is all about. Is creating empowerment, helping people to become stakeholders, real stakeholders that have, a piece, skin in the game, and they're benefiting here, et cetera. So that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm hoping for. And I think that if Renton did that, and here's the good news. Well, I won't say good news, but here's something that we can say, is that the other suburban cities, South County cities, they're not doing much better, with the exception of Kent. Kent, they're on the track, and they're doing a few things differently than we're doing. in terms of how they engage in their community and how they're looking at hiring as well. But I think that we have an opportunity as a city that we could be a leader in this area. I think that if we, led the way and we took a bold step and we came out with an initiative that echoed some of the work that the county and the city is doing, that we could probably catalyze some more cities joining us.
I was just going to address one of the comments you made about construction, because in the 20 years we've been doing commercial construction, we do a lot of public works jobs. And I've seen the changes from when it was mandated that we use minority contractors or women-owned businesses to the fact now that it's recommended and not mandated. Mostly because either the companies weren't there or they didn't have sufficient financial backing to really perform the way you would expect a subcontractor or something to do. So they've actually kind of backed off on how they do that, and it's now it's more you should do this percentage of your contract should be that way, and so I guess what I'm saying is you have to be flexible in how some of these things are used. For example, we used to almost always use a black electrical contractor, small business disadvantaged neighborhood, so it fit a couple of categories, but he could never pay for his materials. So then we, as the general, would have to put out of our pocket before we were paid by the client even, to fund his purchases. And so there needs to be, obviously not from the city supply, but somewhere there needs to be better support for those businesses so that they can actually perform, like the rest of them. So I'm just saying there needs to be flexibility, because you can't demand sometimes that this should happen without realizing that there's reasons it's not.
Okay, well, in response to that, Terry, I'll tell you, I've been pretty active in doing a number of things over the past couple of years, and I've become associated with a group called NAMC, which is the National Association of Minority Contractors. And I've traveled to forums and regarding, most recently, the issue with WashDOT and how the Federal Highway Association has come down on them for with a disparity study that was done that showed that they were not creating the kind of opportunities for minority business contractors, and that there was a question as to whether or not women business enterprises, minority women business enterprises, were getting more business than the minority business contractors. And the conclusion was, yes, they were. And they also found that many of those minority women business enterprises were white business owners run by white females, which created disparity among those minority business enterprise companies. And so right now, WashDOT is going through a process, and they had to do these workshops, these town hall meetings throughout the state, to
the women-owned business is another example of something that used to be mandated and is no longer.
If I can finish. Yeah, well, one of the things was that they're going back, they're going to have to, WashDOT is going to have to create some different outcomes in terms of how they award those contracts and create better access for the minority business contractors. And specifically, the reason that I say that is to address your point of lack of funding, lack of resource, lack of being able to follow through and do the thing that they were, yes.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that happens is when companies don't get the financial opportunities that they should. I mean, because to build up your bank of business, to build up your, you've got to have assets, you've got to get work. And if you're not getting contracts, if you're not getting work, that creates a problem. I'll tell you a game that I used to play with my daughter Rachel when I would drive from home to school. I would drive her from home to school. And at the time she was going to school down on Maple Valley Highway down near Ron Regis Park. We would pass by all of the different construction sites that were going on in Renton, and I'd play the game called Where's Willie and Where's Juan? Because we wouldn't see any black or brown workers on these sites. Okay, and I found that pretty sad, you know, that we would see that. So I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned about our being sensitive to hiring people of color throughout our city. We should ultimately be getting to a place where our workforce is similar to our population, and we have opportunities to do
I
that.
guess all I'm trying to say is that there are certain races that align themselves with certain type of work. We've been in business for 20 years. We've had typically between 20 and 30 employees. We had one black employee that lasted 2 days. Why, I don't know. Now, you put out the word that you need a carpenter, you get Latinos. So there's certain ethnic groups that align themselves with certain things. You know, we'll find that the Russians do roofs, somebody else does drywall. I mean, they work together with their own kind, and they find these niches, you know, that they're good at. And on the non-construction side, if you need adult family home care, they're Romanian. So I mean, you just find that. So saying that, you know, there's not enough black in construction, or there's not enough black in the firefighters or whatever is probably true, but there may be other reasons that they're not there, not just the fact that they weren't hired.
Well,
I
Sorry.
could cut this off.
Well, let me just, I have to say
No,
this, Don,
you can't.
Based on the outcomes of the disparity study that was done on the state of Washington, that's not the case.
Well, we're getting way off
Yeah,
field.
sorry.
And I think where we want to do is be ready when we have our council committee, the whole on this topic, and talk about what positive steps
Right.
we can do. And that's the direction that I want to go. If it's training, then let's talk about training. If it's how we encourage minorities and policies that we need to change that are discouraging minorities from applying, then we need to talk about that, and look at solutions. We can go back and forth forever on all the background and the reasonings, but what we need to do is focus on what's going to go on in the future. And I think there's nobody in this room that doesn't understand the need to hire more minorities, and we need to get started. I mean, and so that's the way I want to go. And with that, I can just make one thing is I think, and we need to start earlier, programs earlier for kids, so that they feel they want to be a fireman, they want to be a truck driver, they want to be a policeman. I mean, they realize the potential that they have, and how do we help get them. So it's a long process, and with that, I'm going to close this off, and we'll have a longer discussion. And I want that discussion, when we have it, to be a positive discussion as to not what we're not doing, what are we going to do. And I think I agree. We need to do something. So let's talk about that.
I want to just say this, that I want to thank you for acknowledging that we do as policymakers need to think about how to positively address this. And if there are policies that are not working, that we need to address those. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you.
Okay. The next thing is